The moment I saw my sister Penelope whispering to a stranger at my wedding rehearsal dinner while pointing at me, I knew she was about to destroy everything. What she didn't know was that I'd been recording her crimes for 6 months. My name is Iris Vance, and I'm 30 years old. What you're about to hear is how my own sister hired private investigators to destroy my wedding, tried to prove I was a thief and a liar, and ended up in FBI handcuffs instead. But let me start from the beginning, because this twisted story begins with the death of the one person who truly saw Penelope for what she was. Before I continue, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Thank you. 8 months ago, my grandmother Lily passed away after a long battle with lung disease. I'd spent the last 2 years of her life as her primary caregiver, driving her to appointments, managing her medications, and spending countless nights by her bedside when she couldn't sleep. My older sister Penelope, 6 years my senior at 36, was always too busy with her important investment banking career to help. She'd show up once a month with flowers from the gas station and stay for exactly 45 minutes, usually on her phone the entire time. When the will was read, Penelope nearly had a stroke right there in the lawyer's office. Grandmother Lily had left me 200,000 tau, and her collection of vintage jewelry, including Art Deco engagement ring from 1932 that had been in our family for generations. Penelope received 200,000 taus, and her collection of vintage jewelry, including the Art Deco engagement ring from 1932 that had been in our family for generations. Penelope received 200 Zoroastrian, and her collection of vintage jewelry, including Art Deco engagement ring from 1932 that had been in her family for generations. Penelope received 25,000. That was it. The lawyer also mentioned that Grandma owned 45% of the family import business that Penelope had been managing, and those shares would remain in trust for now. Penelope's face turned the color of an overripe tomato. She stood up so fast her chair tipped backward, and through gritted teeth she hissed that there must be some mistake. The lawyer calmly showed her grandma's video testimony recorded just 3 months before her death, where she clearly stated her wishes and her reasons. In the video, Grandma looked directly at the camera and said that love is shown through actions, not words, and she wanted to reward the grandchild who had shown her true love. That should have been the end of it. But I knew my sister. Penelope had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She married Richard, a successful corporate lawyer, lived in a mini mansion in the Hamptons, and drove a Range Rover that cost more than most people's annual salary. The idea that the grandmother she'd ignored had chosen me, the public school teacher with the modest apartment, and the Honda Civic, was absolutely unacceptable to her. The strange incident started 3 weeks after the funeral. First, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, mentioned that a nice young man had been asking about me, wanting to know if I'd recently come into money or made any large purchases. Then the mailman told me someone had been photographing my mail before I collected it. My landlord called to verify my employment because someone claiming to be from a credit agency had questions about my ability to pay rent. But the funniest part was Penelope suddenly developing an interest in being a loving sister. She'd show up at my apartment with store-bought cookies still in the plastic container, claiming she'd been baking all morning and just happened to have extras. She'd casually ask about my finances while pretending to admire my engagement ring from Caleb, my fiancé of 2 years. The woman who hadn't voluntarily spent time with me since high school was suddenly dropping by twice a week with terrible excuses. During one visit, she actually asked if I'd been feeling guilty about anything lately because I looked stressed. This from a woman who once told me that teaching was a job for people who couldn't succeed in the real world. I served her instant coffee in my cheapest mug and watched her pretend to enjoy it while fishing for information about Grandma's money. She kept mentioning how expensive weddings were these days, wondering aloud how Caleb and I could possibly afford the beautiful venue we'd chosen at the Emerald Valley Vineyard. The thing is, Caleb's family owned a construction business, and we'd been saving for our wedding for 3 years. We didn't need Grandma's money for the wedding, but Penelope couldn't fathom that two middle-class people could afford anything nice without stealing or lying. She sat there in her designer suit with her Birkin bag purse taking up half my coffee table, suggesting that maybe I should have the will reviewed again to make sure everything was distributed fairly. I told her the only thing that needed reviewing was her definition of fair. 2 months before my wedding, things escalated dramatically. My friend Sarah, who worked at the local credit union, pulled me aside during lunch and whispered that someone had been trying to access information about my accounts. She couldn't give me details due to privacy laws, but she showed me security footage of a man in a cheap suit showing Penelope's photo on his phone to the bank manager. That's when I knew Penelope had hired private investigators. The next day, I installed a doorbell camera and started documenting everything. Within a week, I had footage of 3 different men photographing my apartment, building my car, and even following me to the grocery store. One of them was so obvious about it that the store security guard asked if I needed help. The investigator actually tried to pretend he was shopping for organic kale while standing in the cereal aisle. Penelope's manipulation of our father started around the same time. Dad had been neutral about the will, saying Grandma had the right to distribute her assets however she wanted. But suddenly he started calling me with concerns. Did I pressure Grandma when she was weak? Was I sure the will was legitimate? Had I maybe influenced her when she wasn't thinking clearly? These weren't his words. I could practically hear Penelope's voice coming out of his mouth. Then the wedding sabotage began. First, our florist called to cancel, saying they'd received information that we were planning to skip out on the bill. When I pressed for details, they admitted someone claiming to be my concerned relative had warned them about us. Next, the caterer had a mysterious scheduling conflict that hadn't existed the week before. The venue received an anonymous complaint about potential noise violations and threatened to cancel our contract. That's when Richard, Penelope's husband, reached out to me. He asked to meet at a coffee shop downtown, looking over his shoulder like he was in a spy movie. The man was genuinely scared of his own wife. He slid a folder across the table and told me Penelope had hired not one, not two, but 3 different private investigation firms. She'd spent over $50,000 of their savings trying to prove I was a fraud. Richard showed me credit card statements, emails to the investigators, and even a spreadsheet where Penelope had been tracking my supposed lies. She'd created categories like financial deception, elder abuse evidence, and mental instability indicators. Under that last one, she'd written that I chose teaching as a career, which apparently indicated poor judgment. I couldn't help but laugh, which made Richard relax a little. He told me Penelope had been acting increasingly erratic, staying up all night researching inheritance law, convinced she could overturn the will if she could just prove I was unfit. She'd even consulted with 5 different lawyers, all of whom told her she had no case. But Penelope didn't accept defeat. She never had. In high school, when she lost the student council election, she tried to get the winner disqualified on a technicality about campaign posters. The worst part was the way she was poisoning the extended family against me. She told our aunts that I had isolated Grandma from the family during her illness. She told our cousins that I had stolen jewelry from Grandma's house before the will was read. She even told our great-uncle Harold that I was planning to sell Grandma's house and pocket the money, even though the house had been sold 2 years ago to pay for Grandma's medical care, and Penelope had been the one managing that sale. But Richard revealed something even more shocking. He'd been tracking strange transactions in Penelope's business accounts, large sums of money moving to offshore accounts, invoices that didn't match shipments, contracts with companies that seemed to exist only on paper. He thought Penelope was embezzling from the family import business, the one where Grandma had been a silent partner. He'd been gathering evidence for divorce proceedings, but now he wondered if there was more to it. I started my own investigation that night. Caleb helped me go through public records, business filings, and financial documents that were available online. What we found made my stomach turn. Penelope had been siphoning money from the business for at least 2 years, right around the time Grandma got sick, and stopped reviewing the monthly reports. Meanwhile, Penelope kept up her performance as the concerned sister. She'd call me crying, saying she just wanted to protect me from making mistakes with my inheritance. She brought wedding magazines from 2015 that she'd found in her garage, suggesting venues that had closed years ago. She even offered to help with the wedding planning, then recommended vendors who were either out of business or so expensive they were clearly meant to drain my savings. Her acting was so bad that Caleb started calling her performances Penelope's Community Theater Hour. The deeper I dug into Penelope's embezzlement, the clearer her desperation became. Using the login credentials Grandma had written in her address book, I accessed the business's cloud storage. 2 years of doctored invoices, fake vendor payments, and mysterious consulting fees all led to accounts in Zurich. Penelope had stolen over $800,000 while Grandma was dying. The pattern was clever, but cruel. She'd started small, $10,000 on here, $15,000 there. Always during months when Grandma was hospitalized, she knew no one would be checking the books while we were all worried about Grandma's health. By the time Grandma passed, Penelope had created an entire phantom supply chain, complete with fake companies that existed only to funnel money offshore. I realized why Penelope needed to discredit me so badly. If I was proven to be a liar and a thief, no one would believe me if I discovered her embezzlement. She was creating a narrative where I was the dishonest sister who'd manipulated a dying woman. That way, if I ever found out about the missing money, she could claim I was just trying to deflect from my own crimes. Subscribe to my channel if you're enjoying this crazy story. And please hit that like button because your support helps me continue sharing these unbelievable family dramas. This story is about to get even wilder. The wedding planning continued despite Penelope's sabotage. Caleb's family stepped up in ways that made me cry with gratitude. His mother called her connections and found us a new florist. His father's construction crew offered to help decorate the venue. His grandmother, a feisty 80-year-old named Dottie, called Penelope and told her that if she showed her face at the wedding wearing white, she'd personally escort her out. Dottie had been married 4 times and claimed she knew how to spot a troublemaker from 50 yards away. But Penelope wasn't done. She started showing up at wedding vendor meetings pretending to be helping while actually trying to gather intelligence for her big reveal. She'd corner the wedding planner and ask if we'd paid our deposits. She'd tell the photographer that there might be some family drama and to keep his camera ready. She even approached the priest and suggested he might want to emphasize the importance of honesty during the ceremony. I started recording everything, every conversation with Penelope, every phone call, every interaction. California is a 2-party consent state, but I made sure to tell her I was recording for wedding memories. She was so focused on her own scheme that she didn't realize she was creating evidence against herself. In one recording, she actually admitted to hiring the private investigators, claiming it was for my own good to make sure I wasn't being scammed. The real breakthrough came when I found emails between Penelope and someone named Julian Thorne, who turned out to be her partner in the embezzlement scheme. Julian had been creating the fake companies and managing the offshore accounts, but their partnership was falling apart. Julian wanted his cut of the money and Penelope was stalling. She'd promised him $200,000 but had only paid him $50,000. His emails were getting increasingly threatening. Richard had been documenting everything on his end too. He'd installed a recording app on his phone and captured Penelope practicing her wedding speech, where she planned to stand up and announced that she had proof I'd forged Grandma's signature on legal documents. She'd hired a handwriting expert who, for the right price, was willing to say anything. She practiced her dramatic reveal over and over, even timing how long it would take security to reach her if they tried to remove her from the venue. The funniest part was how bad Penelope's private investigators were. One got stuck in my apartment building's dumpster while trying to go through my trash. Another one approached my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, so many times that she started hitting him with her purse whenever she saw him. The third one tried to follow me to work, but got lost because he was using an outdated GPS and ended up at an abandoned school 3 miles away. Meanwhile, I'd contacted a lawyer who specialized in financial crimes. When I showed him the evidence of embezzlement, his eyes went wide. This wasn't just theft, it was wire fraud, tax evasion, and customs violations. Since the import business dealt with international shipments, he immediately contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, who, as it turned out, had already been investigating the business for suspicious activity. The FBI agent assigned to the case, Special Agent Harper, told me they'd been tracking unusual payment patterns for 6 months, but hadn't been able to identify the source. My evidence was exactly what they needed. They'd been watching Julian Thorne for other criminal activities, and Penelope had just made their job much easier. Agent Harper asked if Penelope was planning any upcoming actions, and I told him about the wedding. His response was unexpected. He asked if we'd mind having some additional guests at our ceremony. 3 weeks before the wedding, I sat in a conference room with FBI agents, my lawyer Richard and Caleb, planning what Agent Harper called Operation Wedding Bells. The plan was brilliantly simple. We would let Penelope execute her plan to expose me at the wedding, while the FBI gathered the final evidence they needed for arrest. They wanted her to feel confident, even cocky, because desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes would strengthen their case. The agents would attend as guests strategically placed throughout the venue. Richard would wear a wire to capture any last-minute admissions from Penelope. We'd have the wedding videographer live stream the ceremony, supposedly for relatives who couldn't attend, but really to create an indisputable record of Penelope's false accusations and the subsequent arrest. Penelope, meanwhile, was ramping up her campaign to destroy me. She created a 40-page document titled Evidence of Iris's Deception, complete with photoshopped bank statements, fabricated emails, and testimonies from her paid experts. She'd convinced our father that she was protecting the family from scandal. Dad, bless his confused heart, didn't understand why his daughters couldn't just get along, but trusted Penelope because she showed him official papers. The extended family was completely divided. Team Penelope included the relatives who'd always been impressed by her success and wealth. Team Iris consisted of the cousins who remembered how I'd helped them with homework, the aunts who appreciated my care for Grandma and Uncle Harold, who never liked Penelope anyway, because she'd once called his prized rose garden pedestrian. Richard was barely holding it together. He told me Penelope had started talking to divorce lawyers not because she wanted to leave him, but to research how to hide assets in case her plan backfired. She didn't know he'd already filed for divorce and frozen their joint accounts. He'd also discovered she'd taken out a second mortgage on their house without telling him, using the money to fund her investigation into me and pay Julian Thorne. The humor in all this darkness came from unexpected places. Caleb's grandmother Dottie appointed herself as my personal bodyguard, showing up at wedding preparations with a taser she'd bought online. She claimed she'd used it once on a masher in 1987 and was ready to use it again. The wedding planner, after learning about the situation, offered to seat Penelope directly in front of the chocolate fountain just in case someone needed to accidentally bump into her. My teacher friends created Operation Bridesmaid Shield. They scheduled shifts to make sure I was never alone with Penelope, using code words like code algebra if Penelope approached. One of them, a former Marine turned kindergarten teacher, practiced tactical maneuvers for blocking Penelope's access to the microphone during the ceremony. 2 weeks before the wedding, Penelope made her final preparations. She sent formal letters to 50 family members telling them to pay special attention during the ceremony because important information about the family's future would be revealed. She hired a process server to be ready with cease and desist orders for the inheritance. She even booked a conference room at a nearby hotel for what she called an emergency family meeting after the ceremony. But Penelope made crucial mistakes. In her arrogance, she sent Julian Thorne the final payment plan via email, detailing how she'd pay him after she regained control of Grandma's estate by proving I was unfit. She didn't realize the FBI was monitoring Julian's communications. She also transferred $50,000 from the business account to pay her handwriting expert, creating a clear trail of fraudulent activity. The week of the wedding, everything accelerated. Penelope called vendors pretending to be me, trying to cancel services. She told the venue there was a bomb threat, hoping to force a cancellation. She even contacted Caleb's employer, suggesting they should know their employee was marrying a criminal. Each action was more desperate than the last, and we documented everything. Richard gave me recordings of Penelope practicing her wedding speech in the mirror. She'd refined it to exactly 12 minutes, planning to start with tears about protecting the family, transition to disappointment about my betrayal, and conclude with the dramatic reveal of her evidence. She'd even choreographed when to pull out the folders, when to point at me, and when to demand the wedding be stopped. The FBI agents attended the rehearsal dinner, posing as Caleb's extended family from Texas. Penelope was so focused on her plan that she didn't notice them photographing her meeting with the private investigators in the parking lot. She'd hired all three to attend the wedding as witnesses, promising them bonuses if their testimony was convincing enough. That night, unable to sleep, I found an old letter from Grandma in my jewelry box. She'd written it when I first started taking care of her. It said, "My dear Iris, your sister thinks success means taking everything you can. You know it means giving everything you have. That's why I trust you with my legacy. Don't let her bitterness poison your sweetness. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and letting karma handle the rest." I thought about that letter as I prepared for my wedding day, knowing it would be the most dramatic day of our family's history. Penelope thought she was the director of this show, but she was about to discover she'd cast herself as the villain in her own production. The morning of my wedding arrived with the kind of perfect sunny weather that Penelope would later claim I didn't deserve. I woke up at 5:30 in Caleb's childhood bedroom at his parents' house, tradition keeping us apart the night before. My phone already had 17 missed calls from Penelope, and one text that simply said, "Today, everyone will know the truth." I deleted it and went to make coffee. By 7, the bridal suite at the Emerald Valley Vineyard was buzzing with activity. My bridesmaids had established a security perimeter that would make the Secret Service proud. My maid of honor, Jessica, had actually printed out photos of Penelope and distributed them to the venue staff with instructions to alert her immediately if she tried to access restricted areas. Penelope arrived at 8:30, 2 hours before the ceremony, dragging 3 large boxes and wearing a cream-colored dress that she would spend the rest of the day insisting was champagne. The dress had so much tulle, it looked like she'd robbed a ballet company. Dottie took one look at her and loudly asked if someone had ordered a backup wedding cake, because that's what Penelope resembled. The boxes Penelope brought contained copies of her evidence dossier, one for each family member. She'd spent thousands having them professionally bound with gold embossing that read, "The Truth About Iris Vance." Inside were the doctored bank statements, the paid expert testimonies, and photos the private investigators had taken of me doing suspicious things like grocery shopping and going to work. The 3 private investigators arrived separately, trying to blend in as regular guests. The first one wore a suit that still had the rental tag sticking out. The second brought a date he'd clearly hired from an escort service who kept asking him what her motivation was supposed to be. The third tried to look casual, but stood out because he was taking photos of everything, including the catering setup and the exit signs, like he was casing the joint. Penelope cornered our father in the garden before the ceremony, spreading her documents across a bench like she was presenting a court case. Dad, wearing the navy suit I'd bought him and looking deeply uncomfortable, kept glancing at me through the window as I got my hair done. I could see him trying to reconcile Penelope's evidence with the daughter he'd watched grow up. Agent Harper and his team had arrived dressed as Caleb's extended family. They blended in perfectly, except for the fact that they were all mysteriously interested in staying near the exits and had earpieces they kept touching. One of them was posing as Caleb's cousin from Austin and had to quickly Google facts about Texas when Dottie started quizzing him about local restaurants. The wedding planner, who'd been fully briefed on the situation, had strategically arranged the seating to put Penelope front and center, right where everyone could see her when she made her move. She'd also arranged for 2 security guards to be stationed near the altar, supposedly for the expensive flower arrangements, but really to intercept Penelope if needed. Meanwhile, Richard was in the groom's suite with Caleb, wearing not just a wire, but 3 different recording devices because he wanted to make sure everything was captured. He looked pale and kept checking his phone for updates from his divorce lawyer. He'd already moved his important belongings to his brother's house and changed all his passwords. He told Caleb that after 10 years of marriage, he was finally going to see Penelope face consequences for her actions. At 9:45, 15 minutes before the ceremony, Penelope made her move to set the stage. She placed her evidence folders on specific chairs, targeting the family members she thought would be most influential. She cornered the photographer and told him to be ready for a major news event, even slipping him an extra $500 to make sure he captured everything. The humor of the morning came from the flower girl, my 5-year-old niece, Sophie, who'd been told by her other grandmother that Aunt Penelope was being naughty. Sophie took this very seriously and followed Penelope around saying things like, "Santa's watching you and naughty people get coal, not cake." Penelope, trying to maintain her composure, kept shooing Sophie away, but the little girl was persistent. At one point, Sophie loudly announced that Penelope smelled like the mean lady at the bank, which made several guests laugh. My makeup artist, unaware of the drama, kept commenting on how calm I seemed for a bride. She said most women were nervous wrecks, but I seemed like I was preparing for something I'd been planning for years. She wasn't wrong. I'd been preparing for this confrontation with Penelope my whole life. Today just happened to be my wedding day, too. Penelope's final preparation was to gather her private investigators for a quick huddle by the fountain. I watched from the bridal suite window as she handed them scripts, actual typed scripts of what they should say when called upon. One of them was practicing his lines, moving his hands dramatically, as he recited allegations about my suspicious financial activity. He looked like a community theater actor preparing for his big moment. As 10 owner approached and guests took their seats, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Half the family knew something was going to happen, but they didn't know what. The other half just thought Penelope had overdressed for the occasion. The FBI agents were in position. The cameras were rolling and the live stream had started supposedly for Great Aunt Mildred in Florida, but really for the federal prosecutor's office. I stood at the mirror in my wedding dress, the same vintage lace dress Grandma had worn in 1953, which Penelope had always assumed she'd wear one day. Caleb knocked on the door, breaking tradition, to see me before the ceremony. He took my hands and said, "Whatever happens out there, remember that by the end of this day we'll be married and Penelope will be exactly where she deserves to be." The wedding march began at exactly 10:05, and I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, feeling like I was walking into battle in a wedding dress. Penelope sat in the front row, her cream dress spread across two chairs, clutching her evidence folder like a weapon. Her eyes followed me with the intensity of a predator tracking prey. The ceremony began beautifully. Caleb's vows made me cry genuine tears, talking about how I'd shown him that real strength was kindness and real wealth was love. When it was my turn, I spoke about trust, honesty, and the family we choose versus the family we're born into. Looking directly at Penelope as I said it, she shifted in her seat, checking her watch, waiting for her moment. Father Michael, who'd been briefed on the potential disruption, moved through the ceremony steadily. When he reached the pivotal moment, his voice carried across the garden. "If anyone here has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." Penelope stood up so fast her chair tipped backward with a crash. "I object," she declared, her voice shaking with what she probably thought was righteous anger but sounded more like desperation. "This wedding is built on lies and deception." The crowd gasped. The photographer's camera clicked rapidly. Agent Harper shifted slightly in his seat, his hand moving to his pocket. Richard hit record on his phone even though he was already wired. Penelope opened her folder with a flourish, pulling out papers like she was revealing royal decrees. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, I come to you with a heavy heart, but a duty to the truth. My sister Iris Vance has perpetrated a massive fraud against our family." She held up the first document. "I have here proof that Iris manipulated our dying grandmother into changing her will. This handwriting analysis proves that signatures were forged." She waved the paper dramatically, not realizing the expert who'd provided it was about to lose his license for falsifying documents. Furthermore, Penelope continued, her voice gaining confidence. "Private investigators have documented Iris's suspicious financial activities, including large cash deposits immediately after our grandmother's death. She claimed to be a simple teacher, but she's been living like someone with stolen money." At this point, I raised my hand calmly. "Penelope, those deposits were from selling my car and Caleb's bonus from work. We have all the documentation, but please continue. I'm sure everyone would love to hear more of your theories." This threw Penelope off her rhythm, but she pressed on. "You manipulated Grandma when she was weak. You isolated her from the family. You turned her against me." Her voice cracked on that last part, showing the real hurt beneath all her schemes. That's when I nodded to the wedding videographer, who switched the display screens around the venue from romantic photos of Caleb and me to something very different. Suddenly, every screen showed bank records, wire transfers, and invoices from Penelope's embezzlement scheme. "Actually, Penelope," I said, my voice carrying clearly thanks to the wireless microphone I wore, Let's talk about the real fraud. $800,000 stolen from Grandma's business over 2 years, offshore accounts in Zurich, fake vendors named Thorn Consulting and VRS Imports. Penelope's face went from red to white to green, like a confused traffic light. That's... that's ridiculous. You're making this up? Richard stood up from the groomsmen's section. Actually, Penelope, it's all true. I've been documenting everything for months. The FBI has been investigating for even longer. That's when Agent Harper stood up, pulling out his badge. Mrs. Penelope Hartley, I'm Special Agent Harper with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit customs violations. Penelope tried to run, but in her enormous cream dress and 6-in heels, she didn't get far. She tripped over her own train near the fountain, falling spectacularly into a display of lees. As 2 agents helped her up and produced handcuffs, she screamed, "This is entrapment. Ira set me up. She's the criminal here." The 3 private investigators tried to slowly back away, but Agent Harper's team stopped them. One of them immediately started cooperating, admitting Penelope had paid him to fabricate evidence. The second claimed he thought this was all legitimate research. The third, the one with the obvious escort date, just kept muttering, "I'm keeping the retainer right." The check cleared. Right, Penelope's arrest was being live-reamed to hundreds of distant relatives and friends who'd tuned in for a wedding, but got a federal crime bust instead. My cousin in California later said it was better than any reality TV show she'd ever watched. Great Aunt Mildred in Florida apparently opened champagne and toasted the screen. As the FBI led Penelope away, she made one last desperate play. "Daddy, tell them. Tell them how Iris manipulated everyone. You know I'm the good daughter. I'm the successful one." Our father, who'd been frozen in shock, finally spoke. "Penelope, I just watched you try to destroy your sister's wedding with lies, while the FBI showed evidence of you stealing from your grandmother's business. The only person who manipulated anyone was you, the photographer." Earning every penny of his fee plus Penelope's bribe captured it all. The image that would later go viral showed Penelope in handcuffs, her cream dress covered in lily pollen mascara streaming down her face, while in the background, the wedding party stood in perfect formation like nothing had happened. After the FBI vehicles left with Penelope, Father Michael cleared his throat and said, "Well, that was certainly a first for me. Shall we continue with the holy matrimony, or does anyone else have any federal crimes to confess?" The tension broke with laughter. Caleb took my hand, whispered, "Your family is never boring." And we resumed the ceremony. When Father Michael pronounced us husband and wife, the applause was thunderous, not just for our marriage, but for the absolute karma we'd all just witnessed. The reception that followed was legendary. Everyone had a Penelope story to share, and the open bar helped loosen tongues. Our cousin Janet admitted Penelope had tried to recruit her to testify against me. Uncle Harold revealed Penelope had offered him $10,000 to say he'd seen me stealing from Grandma's house. Our Aunt Patricia said Penelope had called her 17 times trying to convince her I was mentally unstable. The DJ who'd been watching the whole arrest through the window created a special playlist that included Jailhouse Rock, I Fought the Law, and Karma Police. When he played Truth Hurts by Lizzo, the entire wedding party formed a conga line. Dottie led it, shouting, "This is better than my third wedding." When my ex's mistress showed up, Dad found me during the father-daughter dance, tears in his eyes. He apologized for doubting me for letting Penelope manipulate him. He told me he'd been so proud of Penelope's success that he'd ignored the warning signs. The way she'd treated Grandma, the way she'd always needed to be better than everyone else, the way she'd never been satisfied with what she had. He promised to get therapy to understand how he'd enabled her behavior for so long. Richard got drunk, really drunk, and gave an impromptu speech about the 10 years he'd wasted with Penelope. He told stories about her crushing people in business deals, about the friends she'd alienated, about the family members she'd used and discarded. Then he raised his glass and said, "To Iris and Caleb, may your marriage be everything mine wasn't, honest, loving, and free of federal investigations." The private investigators who'd been detained for questioning and released actually stayed for the reception. One of them approached me with a piece of wedding cake and an apology. He said he'd been in the PI business for 20 years and should have known something was off when Penelope asked him to plant evidence. He offered to testify against her and refund her money to help pay back what she'd stolen. The wedding photographer pulled me aside to show me the shots he'd gotten. The one of Penelope falling into the flowers was artistic, almost Renaissance in its composition. The one of her in handcuffs with the wedding party in the background looked like a magazine cover. He asked if I wanted them deleted, but I told him to keep everything. This was part of our story now, the part where justice was served as an appetizer. Around midnight, after most guests had left, I found out Penelope had been denied bail. The prosecutor considered her a flight risk due to the offshore accounts. She'd spent her wedding night not in the honeymoon suite she'd booked to celebrate my humiliation, but in federal detention. The other inmates, according to Richard's divorce lawyer who had connections, were very interested to hear about the woman who'd been arrested at her own sister's wedding. Caleb and I left for our honeymoon in Hawaii the next morning. At the airport, the TSA agent recognized me from the viral video. "You're the bride whose sister got arrested," she exclaimed. "Girl, that was the best thing I've ever seen. Your grandmother must be smiling down from heaven." 3 months later, I visited Penelope in federal detention. She'd lost weight, her designer clothes replaced with standard issue gray, her perfectly manicured nails now bare, but her delusion remained intact. She spent the entire visit explaining how this was all a misunderstanding, how I'd conspired against her, how the FBI had it all wrong. When I told her I was pregnant and would name the baby Lily after Grandma if it was a girl, she actually laughed. "You think you've won?" she said, "but I'll be out in a few years and I'll rebuild everything. You'll see. I'm the successful sister. I've always been the successful one." I stood to leave and told her the truth she'd never accept. Penelope's success isn't about money or status or being better than everyone else. It's about love, family, and integrity. Grandma knew that. That's why she trusted me. Not because I manipulated her, but because I loved her. Something you never learned how to do. The trial was swift, with Julian Thorne testifying against Penelope in exchange for a reduced sentence, the embezzlement evidence from Richard and the FBI's extensive investigation. The verdict was inevitable. Penelope got 20 years for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy. The judge specifically mentioned her attempt to frame me at my wedding as evidence of her complete lack of remorse. Dad sold his house to help pay back what Penelope had stolen from the business. He moved into our guest room temporarily, which turned into permanently when baby Lily was born. He became the grandfather he'd never gotten to be to us, reading stories, changing diapers, and teaching Lily about the grandmother she'd never meet, but whose strength ran through her veins. Richard's divorce was finalized quickly since Penelope couldn't contest it from federal prison. He sent us a wedding gift on our first anniversary, a beautiful photo album with pictures from our wedding, including the arrest with a note. "Every marriage needs a story. Yours just happens to be a federal case." He remarried 2 years later to a kindergarten teacher who'd never heard of offshore accounts. The family import business thrived once the embezzlement stopped bleeding it dry. I took over Grandma's shares and discovered she'd left detailed notes about the business hidden in her recipe box. One note dated a month before she died read, "I know what Penelope is doing. The evidence is in the cloud folder marked pie recipes. Let her hang herself with her own rope. Protect Iris. She has the strength Penelope never had." Maybe this story touched something inside you, a memory of a time you were misunderstood, accused, or underestimated by the people who should have known you best. We all have that one person in our lives, don't we? The one who smiles to your face while sharpening a knife behind your back. The one who confuses net worth with self-worth. Iris's story is a masterclass in patience. It would have been so easy for her to scream, to fight back immediately, to let anger take the wheel. But she understood something profound. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to wait. While Penelope was busy building a house of cards with fake evidence and paid actors, Iris was quietly pouring the concrete foundation of justice. And let's talk about Grandma Lily. Even from beyond the grave, she was the smartest person in the room. Hiding the evidence in a pie recipes folder, that is the kind of genius only a grandmother possesses. It reminds us that our elders see more than we think. They watch, they know, and sometimes they leave us the keys to our own salvation, waiting for us to find them when the time is right. Penelope's downfall wasn't just about greed, it was about arrogance. She truly believed she could buy the truth. She thought her designer dress and her hired investigators made her untouchable. But in the end, she tripped over her own ego and her dress train, falling right into the trap she set for her sister. It's a satisfying reminder that karma doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes it comes with FBI agents and a viral wedding video. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand tall while someone tried to tear you down, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever let someone dig their own grave while you held the shovel? Or maybe you just have a really dramatic wedding story. I want to hear it all. And please tell me where you're watching from, whether you're tuning in from a sunny vineyard or a snowy city. I read every comment, and knowing you're out there listening gives me the inspiration to find and tell more stories of justice, resilience, and the sweet taste of victory. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Remember, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's living happily ever after while they watch from the sidelines or a federal cell. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.